Hey everybody, this is TJR. And yes, I know I'm a little bit late to the party on this one, but I'll have to be honest. I wasn't 100% sure I was even going to do a top 2019 album list this year. This is because I normally do these videos with my good friend Robert Kinsler on the Music Worth Buying show. And our ability to get together and do more shows has been interrupted by the fact that there has been a big disruption in Robert's life that he's currently dealing with right now. But since it is my day off today, this morning, I woke up saying, damn it, I'm just going to do my top albums for 2019. Now, as always, these are in no particular order. These are the albums that gave me the most enjoyment listening to in 2019. I will be using numbers for easy reference, but as I call these out, remember, these numbers do not indicate that I preferred one album over another album in any particular way. So first, number one, No Other, the reissue by Gene Clark. Gene Clark, of course, is best known for his work with the Byrds. And this is his lost fourth studio album released back in 1974. The album was considered a failure. It was considered overindulgent by critics. And it has now risen to that status where it is now considered an overlooked masterpiece. And after listening to it, I have to agree. What some critics back in 1974 would have referred to as self-indulgent and overproduced, I will refer to as evocative, beautiful soundscapes, highlighted by very personal, introspective lyrics. This album was a joy to listen to, and it's available in both standard and deluxe editions. I did do a full review of this album on the channel, and so check that out if you'd like to hear me talk more about it. At number 2, Bird and the Bee, Interpreting the Masters, Volume 2, Van Halen. Now, I did take a moment on this channel to discuss the advanced single remake of Hot for Teacher, but I never got around to reviewing the album here on the channel, so this video will have to suffice. Bird and the Bee are an indie pop duo featuring vocalist Inara George and jazz pianist and producer George Kirsten. And I have been a fan of their lush synth pop sound since their first album. Now, throughout their recording career, Inara George's vocals have always been very well highlighted. But in previous albums, I've never really been able to get the chance to hear what an amazing pianist George Kirsten is. And this album puts his piano skills right into the forefront. The man is amazing. You try playing Eruption on the piano and tell me how easy it is. Now, if you're a Van Halen fan, I want to stress these are very radically different versions of Van Halen classics. And I understand that some Van Halen fans will be seriously turned off by these reinterpretations. But I found these pop remakes to be just delightful and wonderful ear candy. I'm not normally into these tribute albums filled with remakes, and I rarely bring them to episodes like this where I do top 10 lists, but this album really put a smile on my face. Number 3, Santana, Africa Speaks. This is Santana's 25th studio album. And on this one, he teams up with Spanish vocalist Buika. Hopefully I've said her name right. And we also get a featured appearance by British recording artist Laura Mvula, whose debut album, Sing to the Moon, I did discuss on a previous episode of Music Worth Buying. What can I say about this album except I think it's one of his best albums since his classic 70s period. And this album features some of his best and most passionate guitar playing that I have heard since that classic period. Prior to this, he released an EP entitled Mona Lisa, and I have to admit, it came off as kind of self-indulgent. So this album was a tremendous surprise. It is a tight, cohesive album that was recorded in 10 days. It's produced by Rick Rubin, and there is just such an immediacy to this album and such a passion to Santana's guitar playing all throughout that this album really knocked my socks off in a way that I wasn't expecting. I did do a full review of this album on the channel. Please check that out. Number 4 is Norah Jones, Begin Again. This is her 7th studio album, and it features collaborations with Jeff Tweedy and Thomas Bartlett. Now, back when her previous album, Daybreak, back in 2016 was released, I said this is Norah Jones's best album ever. And I've been following her since day one, watching her grow as a songwriter, watching her grow as a musician. And Daybreak, I felt she had reached a pinnacle. And I thought it's probably going to be hard to top this. But if she hasn't topped Daybreak with this new album, Begin Again, she has certainly at least equaled it. And what's amazing about this is that Begin Again is not actually what we refer to as an album, where you go in to the studio and you record an album from start to finish. Begin Again is a collection of singles that she released throughout the year and then collected together. Because of the collaborations and because of the nature of how it was recorded, every song is a completely different flavor from the other. And I really do feel that this album has allowed Norah Jones to stretch musically and artistically in ways that she hasn't previously. It's a very short listen. It's only about 30 minutes. But looking back on the classic rock music period, when the limitations of vinyl forced you to release albums no longer than, say, 40 to 45 minutes in most cases, I have discovered that many of my favorite albums from that time period weren't that long. And this album's short time span is one of its strengths in that it leaves you wanting more. And every track is absolutely solid. I did do an in-depth review on this album earlier in the year, and so please check that one out as well. Number 5, Joe Jackson, Fool. This is his 20th studio album. Now, I'll be honest, I have been familiar with Joe Jackson over the years. I've heard his hits, but I have never really listened to any of his albums in their entirety till now. I was first alerted to this album with the advanced single, Big Black Cloud, and the epic darkness of that song really struck a chord with me and made me curious to hear the rest. I was not disappointed. This is a tremendously solid album, and when it came out, I picked up the vinyl version because it came with an exclusive single featuring a remake of the Steely Dan song Night by Night and the Peter Gunn theme. At number 6, Gary Clark Jr. with This Land. This is his 3rd studio album, and Robert Kinzler introduced me to this album on the Music Worth Buying show. Robert has been into Gary Clark since day one, and while I've always been able to appreciate what he's doing, I wasn't completely won over until I heard this album. When Robert first brought this album onto the show, he remarked that he felt that Gary Clark Jr. was innovating the blues in the same way that Stevie Ray Vaughan was. And after listening to this album numerous times, I have to agree. He may not be quite the guitar shredder that Stevie Ray Vaughan was, but he is innovative in how he approaches the blues. His combination of blues, metal, soul, R&B, hip-hop, and electronic beats, in my opinion, and in Robert's opinion, are helping to push blues into the 21st century. At number 7 is Elton John, Live from Moscow, 1979. Now, this was a Record Store Day release last year in 2019. This album is an amazing performance featuring Elton John, his piano, and percussionist Ray Cooper. These are stripped-down performances and stripped-down versions of classic Elton John hits. And this album highlights what an amazing musician Elton John was and still is to this day. And if you missed this one last year on Record Store Day, I'm happy to tell you that this album will get now a worldwide release later this month in January. At number 8 is Band of Skulls, Love Is All You Love. This is their 5th studio album. I didn't get a chance to talk about this album on the show with Robert. Now, before anybody was ever comparing Greta Van Fleet to Led Zeppelin, I was comparing Band of Skulls' debut album, Baby Darling Dollface Honey, to Led Zeppelin. I felt they had really captured that whole classic British blues heavy rock sound with that album. And I've been a fan ever since. But I have to admit, this new album, when I first heard it, it kind of surprised me. It wasn't what I was expecting. The band decided to take a more electronic approach with this album and enlisted the aid of producer Richard X. Bassist Emma Richardson said that because the band had lost their drummer, they decided to start experimenting with electric drums and acoustic drums. And that Richard X helped the band to experiment with a mix of live and electronic elements to achieve a rock and roll element with a dance beat. So this was a much more dance-oriented album than I'd been previously used to hearing with them. But it quickly grew on me. And I'll be curious to see if they continue to move in this direction with the next album, or if they go back more to their 70s British heavy rock blues sound. Number 9 is Coldplay, Everyday Life. And no one is more surprised by this than me. If you had told me a year ago that I would be including a Coldplay album in my top 10, I would have thought you were kidding. Now, I don't hate Coldplay, but I've always just been kind of just like borderline in regards to them. Even their hits, I've been like, oh yeah, that's nice, I guess, that's fine. That's always been kind of my reaction. But they really surprised me with this album. This album, they really stretched out and created a tremendous amount of challenging and evocative pop and rock music soundscapes. They went from high-end, expressive, emotive symphony orchestra strings to a track that sounds like it was recorded on a cassette deck recorder in one take. I also have to admit, this album had some of the best packaging that I've seen in 2019. At number 10, Lily and Madeline with Canterbury Girls. This is their 4th full-length album, and this was my first exposure to this pop duo. I was initially intrigued by the advanced single Supernatural Sadness, but this album made a believer out of me with its beautiful, lush harmonies, its melancholy melodies, and strong 70s pop aesthetic. Those are my top 10, but wait, I want to give honorary mention to the Cranberries in the End. This is another album that Robert introduced me to. Now, once again, I liked most of the Cranberries' hits, but was never someone who listened to their albums until now. This 8th and final studio album by the band really surprised me. To craft this album, the remaining surviving band members had to basically take the lead vocals from Dolores O'Riordan's demos and then craft the recordings around them. To be honest, when I first heard about this, I wasn't sure what to expect. But I think the amazing thing about this posthumous release is that it doesn't sound like a posthumous release. It sounds like a solid, cohesive album with everybody working together in the room. So there's my list. Have you heard any of these? Let me know what you think. But also, what were your top 10 for 2019? And if you don't have a top 10, tell me your top 5. This is how we get the music out there to each other, everybody. As always, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say in the comments. And if you like what I'm doing, be sure to click like, subscribe, and be sure to smash the bell notification icon so you can know when I release new videos. 2019 has been a year filled with challenges, a year filled with obstacles, a year filled with trying to understand what are my priorities in life and what are my priorities for this channel. I've done a lot of self-evaluating during 2019, and hopefully in 2020, I can just now move forward. I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank my Patreon supporters who are really helping me make more videos. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.